type of weather impacts football the most? You can go into QBR, fumble, whatever you got.
Yeah, so it depends on how we look at this. If we want to look at a single weather variable, what we look at is we look at wind, we look at precipitation, and we look at temperature. And if you're looking at only one of those, wind is probably the most impactful. We notice this from a total scoring standpoint. We do notice that when there are substantial winds, the total points scored goes down fairly substantially. And then we also notice this from a positional standpoint as well. Now, this is positionally dependent because some positions are impacted more by certain weather conditions. I will say that probably the most impactful is when we have a combo event. So when we have wind and rain, when we have really cold temperatures and it's snowing, those are where we see more considerable impacts, especially to our QBs and our wide receivers.
Now, is there any specific stat, or because I'm assuming everyone here cares about Rodgers and Brady.
Yes, yes.
So is there anything passer rating wise, how much that goes down, what percent that goes down?
So what we look at is we usually look at this through the lens of fantasy football. And typically what we see in windy conditions is we see about a 5 to 10% reduction in QB performance in windy conditions. Actually, RBs get a little bit of a bump. You know, it's an increase in production for them. And wide receivers get about almost a 20% dip from them from a production standpoint. During a combo event, I mean, and I'll even talk about this in terms of specifically Lambeau and the conditions that we're expecting here. If we're expecting a snow event in temperatures, which look like to be in the mid to upper 20s, we're looking at pretty substantial influences historically across all stadiums. We're looking about a bump of around 20 to 25% of a bump for RBs. QBs actually minus 15 to minus 20. I don't know what you caught there, but what I was trying to communicate is we see pretty substantial impacts across all positions and QB. Here's the thing about Rodgers. Rodgers does not seem to be impacted by weather. He is a special QB. He performs almost better when we have these weather events. So when we have snow, we have cold, he's usually playing at his career mean or how he normally does, or even a little bit better. And when we saw this when Tennessee came to town against Green Bay, put up 40 points against this team, Aaron Rodgers just went off 3 or 4 TDs to Devontae Adams. And so typically when we see QBs go into Lambeau, we see them drop off if there's inclement weather. But Rodgers himself, we almost notice a little bit of an increase in his QBR, his passer rating, and how he does and how he performs.
Mm-hmm. And then just before going a little bit deeper into Lambeau and Rodgers and Brady, of course, but how do temperatures below freezing across the board typically impact, same deal, fantasy and scoring?
So temperatures, again, they're not as dramatic as far as a scoring standpoint, total score. We don't see as much of a drop as compared to windy conditions. We definitely do see a drop. Now when we get really substantially low temperatures, we're talking in the teens, low 20s, we're talking those kind of temperatures, there is a considerable drop off. So we could be looking at, again, upwards of around a 20% decrease for wide receivers and QBs. Mm-hmm. We actually see a little bit of a boost for running backs. That's usually due to, they're not able to get maybe a firm grip on the ball. There may be some errant passes. Wide receivers can't get a good grip on the ball. And so we do see a drop in fantasy production, fantasy stats specifically when there is extreme cold.
Mm-hmm. And also just off the top of my head, I forgot before you cut off, you mentioned windy conditions, obviously. So what mm-hmm. would you say the cutoff of windy conditions is? Because obviously, I'd say probably 0 to 10 is probably considered calm most of the time.
Yeah, so you can look at it this way. When you start to see the goalpost shaking and the winds blowing the flags on the goalpost, and you see the flags just along the stadium, when you start to see the referee's pants blowing in the wind, when you can visibly see that means there's going to be an impact. So usually when we start to see substantial impacts, we're looking at wind gusts approaching that 25 to 30 mile an hour mark is when we really start to see impact. And that's what we saw in the Bills game, right? When the Ravens played the Bills, 3 of the 4 missed field goals in that game looked to be weather induced due to the wind. And there looked like to be some errant passes, overthrown passes by Josh Allen due to the just those consistent winds and also those wind gusts that we saw in that game.
So just last question. So do warm weather teams typically have a problem when traveling to areas like Lambeau? And of course, does this apply to Brady and the Bucks? Probably not
Yeah.
so much Brady, but more the rest of the Bucks.
Yeah, so that's the big question, right? Brady is a cold weather quarterback. He came from New England. We don't have any specific stats on looking at designating warm weather teams and seeing what happens when they come to cold environments. But what we have seen is observationally over the last couple of years that certain quarterbacks, certain players are more susceptible to inclement weather, to cold temperatures. Again, we saw this with Ryan Tannehill coming to Green Bay, where he only put up 121 yards, had 2 picks. He just didn't perform as well as he normally would. Another one, Jared Goff, anything below 40 degrees for this QB, he seems to have he seems to struggle a little bit more. So we haven't looked specifically at, as far as from a statistical analysis standpoint, looking at all warm weather teams and what their statistics are when they travel and perform in cold conditions or inclement weather. With regards to the Bucks, Tom Brady, another quarterback that performed just about as well in inclement conditions. We maybe see a slight bump down for him when we have things getting a little cold, or maybe there's some precipitation, but there's not something considerable or anything considerable for him. So I expect in this game that the Bucks are going to solidify the run. Green Bay is a little more susceptible to the run. I think Ronald Jones is going to do okay. I think Leonard Fournette is going to do okay. I think Mike Evans is going to get locked down by Alexander, so I don't expect a big game from him. So I think you got to go to the Antonio Browns, the Chris Godwins, the Gronkowskis in this game. And I think Brady is going to kind of pick apart, do some short passes, establish the run game. So I think they're going to score points. I don't expect this to be a 38-10 ordeal that we saw earlier this year, right? I expect Green Bay to come out, Aaron Rodgers be able to throw the ball effectively and efficiently, and I expect Tom Brady to do that as well. But I think they're really going to focus on that run game.
All right, I think that's all I have.